Part 1. The Smirk and the Cut. Let me tell you something about being the silent scaffolding that keeps a company standing. No one notices the steel beams until they decide to tear the building down. For 9 years, I was that scaffolding. I was the quiet one in meetings, the one who knew how to bypass every firewall and breathe life into dead servers with a flick of code and a black coffee. While the C-suite dined on catered lunches and made jokes about the Wi-Fi being haunted, I was buried elbow-deep in server rooms that hummed like metal cathedrals. I didn't need praise. I didn't even need a raise. I just needed respect. Or at least to not be treated like some intern on her first day. Then he showed up. Travis fucking Macklin. New IT director, parachuted in from some consultancy firm that thought it was God's gift to infrastructure. Walked in on his first Monday with his Top Gun aviators still hanging off his collar, like we were all auditioning to kiss his ring. He was loud. Jangly laugh, frat boy cologne. A jaw that screamed, I peaked in 2007. He introduced himself like we should have read his memoir. Let's make this place bleed data, yeah? I smiled tightly, and went back to syncing the redundant NAS clusters he didn't even notice humming behind him. It didn't take long. On Wednesday, 9:02 a.m., we met over the primary root server stack. He strutted in while I was already booted into recovery mode. Fingers flying over the keys like a pianist resurrecting Beethoven. It had crashed the night before, one of our oldest, most temperamental units. I had barely slept. I was halfway through stabilizing the kernel when he leaned against the rack like a model in a budget cologne ad and said it. No woman touches my root server. Like he was laying down a law. Like I was a child scribbling on his whiteboard. I looked up from the terminal and smiled. A long, slow practice smile. The kind you give before you deliver a kill shot. Then I suggest you resuscitate it yourself, I said. It just ate 2 subnets and a third of payroll's authentication tree. He blinked. Then he chuckled, like I'd said something cute. Sweetheart, he said, tapping the chassis like it was a car hood. I've been running infrastructures longer than you've been turning on laptops. I stood. Calm. Measured. My hands were still shaking, but only I knew that. You've been running infrastructures, I repeated. And yet you missed the cascading token loop that was about to nuke HR's entire biometric vault. Fascinating. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. That would have been emotional. And I've learned to save my emotions for war. What I felt wasn't just rage. It was colder than that. Cleaner. It was the birth of a plan. This wasn't going to be a catfight. This was going to be a systematic, surgical, protocol-compliant takedown of an arrogant man who thought his Y chromosome gave him root access to my kingdom. And so I began to sharpen the blade. Because the best revenge isn't sabotage. It's documentation that there's a particular type of hell that unfolds not in fire or fury, but in emails marked high priority from someone who doesn't know what SSH stands for. That week, the one I now call the week of needles, wasn't a sudden ambush. It was slow, pricking, relentless erosion. Paper cuts under fingernails. A death by protocol, ego, and testosterone. Travis didn't just sideline me. He performed it. Meetings that used to require my input now opened with him theatrically announcing, "We'll keep this high level for the non-technical folks." I was the technical folk. When I raised a point, say that rolling out untested patches across all department machines without isolating a test group was madness, he'd interrupt with a smirk. Let's not bore the team with theoreticals, huh? The worst part wasn't the silencing. It was the theft. He presented my optimization of the VM load balancer algorithm as his breakthrough in last Thursday's cross-departmental meeting, complete with a PowerPoint he'd clearly built from my Git logs. My code. My sleepless nights. His smug little graphs. I didn't fight it. Not openly. What I did was notice. I noticed that he granted domain admin access to an intern, just to move some folders faster. I noticed that he disabled email encryption protocols temporarily to troubleshoot a spam filter, then forgot to re-enable them. I noticed he logged into our legacy payroll system without multi-factor authentication and stored the credentials in plain text on his desktop in a file literally called "Don't forget these." I noticed how often he used public Wi-Fi in coffee shops while VPN was disabled. I noticed everything. And I kept notes. Not messy, paranoid ramblings. No. These were beautifully structured, time-stamped, spreadsheet with screenshots and linked log extracts. Color-coded. Foldered. Archived. I called it the God file. Because one day, he would stand before it like a sinner before a wrathful deity. I didn't just wait for him to fall. I curated his downfall one slip at a time. Meanwhile, I kept my face the way women have been trained to wear it for centuries. Neutral, pleasant, just self-effacing enough to be non-threatening. When he called me kiddo in front of the CIO, I smiled so wide I thought my jaw would crack. When he sent me to recable a server room in heels while he took a 4-hour lunch with a VC rep, I replied, "Of course, happy to help." Inside, I was a furnace. He thought he was burying me in humiliation. What he didn't know was, I was laying the groundwork for his digital autopsy. And I wasn't just going to end him. I was going to make sure the company thanked me for it. It happened on a Tuesday, as these things always do. Tuesdays, the day of nothing special. No birthdays. No holidays. Just the flatline hum of another corporate week, stale coffee, flickering fluorescence, and the same air of suffocated purpose that hung over every cubicle. I got the email at 10:16 a.m. Subject: Sync at 10:30, Office 12B. No signature. Just a cold calendar bullet. Office 12B was Travis's lair. Glass walls, whiteboard wallpaper, 2 monitors he barely used but always bragged about. I walked in with my badge clipped, my expression unreadable, my hands empty. That seemed to throw him. He'd probably expected me to bring a laptop or a protest. He didn't ask me to sit. "You're done here," he said, his mouth barely moving around the words. "Pack up. HR will send you the formalities." Just like that. Not "we've decided to part ways." Not "there's been some restructuring." Not even a performance review citation. Just a verdict. Dropped like a guillotine. I stared at him for exactly 3 seconds. Let him squirm in the silence. His fingers hovered awkwardly above his keyboard like he needed to prove he had something urgent to do. Somewhere more important to be. But he didn't. He just wanted to be the kind of man who could dismiss a woman and return to his life unchanged. I gave him what he feared most. Not anger. Not begging. Not questions. Just a small, closed-lipped smile. "You'll regret this," I said. Not a threat. A statement of fact. Then I turned and walked out. No dramatics. No scene. Just the quiet hiss of a chair spinning behind me. I didn't touch a single wire on my way out. Didn't download anything. Didn't back up files. I didn't have to. My God file already lived off network. My logins had been cloned. The tripwires were in place. The seeds had been planted months ago, and the roots were already crawling beneath the building's foundation. When I reached my desk, I packed a single cardboard box. 1 coffee mug, 2 framed photos, my backup phone, and an old USB drive that hadn't been plugged into anything since 2019, but always got side eyes from security. I left my badge on the desk like a calling card. People watched. No one asked questions. Only Janet from finance whispered, "Wait, did they fire you?" I smiled again. Apparently. By the time the elevator doors shut behind me, I was already reconstructing the architecture of their destruction in my head. The company thought they were shedding dead weight. What they didn't know was, I was the nervous system, the immune response, the heartbeat that kept their fragile digital body from hemorrhaging into chaos. They hadn't fired me. They had cut their own throat. And now, I was going to let them bleed. I woke up the next morning at 6:47 a.m. to the sweet sound of silence. No alarms, no Slack pings, no panic calls from some junior admin asking why the internal messaging app was redirecting to a 502 error. Not yet. I poured my coffee, sat cross-legged on the floor, and stared at the blinking light of my offline server box tucked behind an antique arm more like a forgotten deity. Then I clicked execute. I didn't destroy anything. That would have been childish. No, what I did was turn off the lights in a house that I had wired. A master reset of interwoven dependencies, scheduled downtimes nested within layers of maintenance scripts, obscure cron jobs tagged with misleading timestamps. Elegant, reversible, for someone who knew the architecture. Travis was not that someone. By 8:03 a.m., monitors across 4 departments flickered and died. At 8:15, remote logins failed. The ticketing system glitched into an infinite loop. Printers began printing ASCII trees. The biometric scanners in HR wouldn't recognize any inputs, locking 5 senior managers in the bathroom hallway and the CFO out of the vault room. At 8:21, the root server entered recursive lockdown. Then the screaming started. I didn't need eyes inside the building. I'd memorized the rhythms of that beast. I knew that by 8:30, someone from Ops would call the vendor help desk and be told, "Sorry, that setup isn't standard. We didn't configure it." At 8:44, someone would realize the most recent working documentation was a Visio diagram on my old OneDrive account, since deleted. By 9 a.m., a war room would be summoned. And at 9:07, the CEO himself would march into the server room, red-faced and wild-eyed. According to the email forwarded to me by an old friend in facilities. Who the fuck designed this system? She did, someone mumbled. Before she got let go. Travis. It's fine. I'll reroute through the virtual. CEO. You're sweating. You don't know what the fuck you're doing, do you? Travis. I just need access to the CEO. You don't have access. Jesus. Call her. They didn't. Of course they didn't. Pride is a stubborn firewall. Instead, Travis tried to brute force his way through my code. He tried to override a permissions chain I'd looped through 4 internal APIs that no longer pointed to themselves. He tried to restore from backups, but the most recent backup, while perfectly intact, required a key phrase that had only ever been spoken aloud to HR during a security demo 3 years ago. And I knew they hadn't recorded it. I got a text at 11:34 a.m. from Janet in finance. Everything's broken. They're losing their minds. Are you watching this? I was. I had my old monitor on. I had coffee. I had peace. But oddly, I also felt hollow. This should have been the part where I danced in my kitchen, where I cackled like a Bond villain as the infrastructure burned. But it didn't feel like justice yet. It felt like the moment just before the final chess move, when your opponent finally knows they've lost, but you haven't laid down the checkmate yet. The system wasn't dead. It was waiting, sleeping, and I was the only one who still held the key to its resurrection, which meant the game wasn't over. Not yet.by Thursday, the building wasn't just malfunctioning. It was decaying. The facade of competence that Travis had worn like a cheap suit was unraveling stitch by stitch. Externally, the company was still pretending it had things under control. Auto responses were sent, social media stayed quiet, PR crafted vague statements about scheduled infrastructure improvements. Internally, it was panic and prayer. Clients were livid. The government contract team couldn't even access the encrypted submission portal. And an entire Midwestern logistics firm pulled their account after 2 failed invoice transmissions. One international banking partner threatened breach of SLA within 24 hours. And the worst part? The system looked online from the outside. There were blinking lights. Logins half-functioned. Everything hummed just enough to be dangerous. But no one could touch the actual backbone without it snapping. And the whispers began. I wasn't there, but you'd be amazed what people will forward to you when they think they're next on the chopping block. Janet, of course. Craig from DevOps. Even Derek from Janitorial, who once fixed the coffee machine with a firmware patch and had since declared himself IT adjacent. They whispered my name in Slack threads. Has anyone tried reaching out to her? They whispered it in team meetings. She used to fix this stuff in minutes. They whispered it in HR, after the 3rd system-wide crash. They whispered it in legal, after a partner threatened litigation over compromised data access. And eventually, they whispered it in the C-suite. It wasn't loud. Not yet. But like hairline fractures in glass, the pressure built. One conversation leaked through a voice memo sent anonymously to my Proton mail. CEO. What the fuck do you mean you can't fix it? Travis. I'm doing everything I can, sir, but she didn't document half the back end. CEO. Because you told her she wasn't needed. Travis. She was insubordinate. CEO. She was the fucking backbone and you amputated her. Christ. I played that audio twice. Then a 3rd time, sipping wine. You'd think I'd be cackling. You'd think I'd be dancing. But it wasn't joy I felt. It was satisfaction, yes. The slow, grim kind. Like watching a house you warned them not to demolish collapse exactly how you said it would. I was still in the shadows. Still out of reach. Still unbothered on the surface. But the ground beneath them was cracking. And the man who thought he could replace me with bluster and PowerPoint was starting to realize that he'd fired the operating system and kept the malware. They hadn't called me yet. But they would. The system wasn't just broken. The belief in the system was broken. And no one repairs trust like the woman they told to pack a box. By the time the headline hit the front page of TechPulse Weekly, it was already too late to hide the bleeding. Company X paralyzed by ongoing IT meltdown. Sources cite internal sabotage or incompetence. It exploded across LinkedIn and Twitter within hours. The story had everything the industry loved. A rising tech firm brought to its knees by its own hubris. Systems down for nearly a week. Delays in payroll. Clients walking. Rumors of mismanagement. A mysterious firing. Even a quote from a former senior engineer, anonymously noting, "They fired the only person who understood how the engine worked. Now they're trying to fly the plane midair with a wrench and ego." By noon, the stock price dipped 13%. By 2 p.m., 3 venture partners requested urgent review meetings. By 4 p.m., a letter from a private equity board observer leaked, calling the situation a catastrophic failure of leadership and systems continuity. And at 5:11 p.m., my phone lit up with a screenshot from Janet. Image attached. Travis standing alone in the company auditorium, pale, collar unbuttoned, sweat visibly soaking through his shirt, trying to explain back-end inconsistencies to a room of furious stakeholders. Caption: "He's melting. Like actually melting." I stared at it for a long time. I thought I'd feel euphoria. But instead it was something colder. Icy triumph. The kind that doesn't make you laugh. It makes you still. He was being humiliated. Publicly. Systematically. Not with a scream, but with 1,000 silent cuts from people in blazers and smartwatches who never raise their voices, but make empires shatter with a well-placed, "We're concerned." Travis tried to spin it. Claimed he'd inherited a fragile infrastructure. That disgruntled former staff had failed to provide proper documentation. That he was doing everything in his power to restore stability, and that he had identified several critical oversights made under the previous regime. But the wolves were already circling. HR submitted its first resignation the next day. Melissa, the one who'd once told me you intimidate people when you're too prepared. She walked out mid-meeting. More followed. Department heads started BCCING legal on all emails. Vendors suspended support. Legal began whispering gross negligence, under its breath. And me? I was watching it all from the outside. Not hiding, not gloating, just watching. Coolly. Patiently. Every time someone said, "Who let this happen?" Every time a partner asked, "Why didn't you have a contingency plan?" Every time the director was asked for logs he couldn't interpret, systems he couldn't access, backups he couldn't restore. I remembered the smirk he wore when he said, "No woman touches my root server." And now, he was standing in front of a scorched kingdom, trying to rule ashes with no subjects. He made me pack a box. I made him pack a reputation. It came as a late-night email, 2:14 a.m., from the CEO's personal account. Not the assistant. Not HR. Not some legal minion with a template apology. Just a subject line. Please. He had finally broken. The body of the email was a digital white flag, bloated with desperation, sugar-drenched remorse, and a spreadsheet of numbers that would have made my student loan-riddled heart twitch a year ago. "We need you to come back. Travis has been relieved. The board agrees. We'll make you director of infrastructure. CTO, if that's what it takes. Name your salary. Retroactive severance. Apologies on record. Anything. Just please fix this." There it was. Obscene money. Lavish titles. Groveling from men who once called me overattached to process. The company that erased me now begged me to resurrect them. I let the cursor blink on the reply field for a long, long time. A part of me, the part that stayed up at 3 a.m. with dying servers, that documented every duct-taped workaround, that sacrifice weekends to make chaos look like stability. Ached to say yes. But that part was buried under what they'd done. They didn't just fire me. They tried to erase me. They stole my work, insulted my intelligence, humiliated me for sport. They cut out their own heart, and thought the brain would survive. And now they were calling me their defibrillator. So I wrote back. Subject: please. You once told me, through your shiny new hire, that no woman touches your root server. Consider your wish granted. Because now, no one can. Send. I didn't wait for a response. That was the moment I took my power back. Not by helping them up, but by walking away when they finally realized they were on their knees. I wasn't their repair technician. I wasn't their backup plan. I was the architect of a system they never deserved, and now, would never access again. I stood on my balcony with a glass of red wine, the lights of the city flickering beneath me like a fiber optic requiem. Somewhere in a boardroom, panic was setting in. Somewhere someone was whispering, "She said no." I hadn't just left them broken. I'd left them exposed, stripped of my structure, drowning in their own arrogance. And in that moment, I didn't feel rage anymore. I felt sovereignty. They had begged. I had denied. And now the fall would be total. It didn't end with fireworks. It ended with silence. The kind that settles over a battlefield after the smoke clears, and everyone realizes there's no one left to blame except the mirror. Travis was ousted by unanimous board vote. No ceremony, no golden parachute. Just a cold internal memo. Effective immediately, Mr. Macklin is no longer with the company. His LinkedIn changed to exploring opportunities within hours. But the damage stuck to him like digital soot. Word traveled fast in tech circles, especially among the DevOps crowd who live for schadenfreude and Slack leaks. One blog headline read, "Man who said no woman touches my root server, gets booted from the machine." The comments section was brutal. One line was repeated like a refrain. She warned them. Meanwhile, the CEO attempted a full-blown recovery pivot. New hires, firm-wide audits, groveling emails to partners. He even launched a cringy trust rebuild initiative with a hashtag and a badly designed logo. But trust isn't rebuilt. Not when the foundation was pride and misogyny dressed in a blazer. The company was still limping forward, sure. But the swagger was gone. The empire I'd quietly built and held together with caffeine, brilliance, and sheer endurance was now held together with duct tape, NDAs, and desperation. And me? I was home. Not working. Not planning. Just being. No Twitter thread. No expose. No revenge tour. Just coffee. A quiet kitchen. The early morning hum of a fridge. No servers chirping. No Slack echoing my name. No one demanding anything from me at all. The laptop sat closed on the counter like an old weapon retired from war. I stared out the window. The skyline blinking with lights from buildings still buzzing with people who think being loud is the same as being right. They had tried to erase me. They ended up erasing themselves. And yet, in the stillness, I didn't feel triumph the way movies promise it. I felt clarity. They called it sabotage. I call it letting go. Letting the rot rise to the surface. Letting the mask fall from the man who thought volume equals intelligence. Letting the system speak for itself, without me there to save it anymore. Because I didn't destroy them. They destroyed themselves when they mistook me for someone disposable. And now they'd learned the difference between a support role and a structural one. The final sip of coffee was cold. I didn't mind. Turns out the root problem wasn't the server. It was him.